Hello, thanks for choosing to watch this video. My name is Bryan Buschner. I work at the EPPIC Center at Pennsylvania State University, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about how some ideas and strategies from language advising might be useful to you as ITA teachers. For context, I'll be talking a little bit about EPPIC at Penn State, and then I'll go on to talk a little bit about what language advising is. To dig into that, I want to look at some guiding concepts that might be helpful to you. And as concepts, I hope they can form a kind of core idea from which you can draw and use in your own contexts and situations. And then for something a little bit more immediate, actions and activities that you might be able to use to interact with your students, I'll be talking about a couple of advisor strategies. So EPPIC is the English for Professional Purposes Intercultural Center. We're an English for Specific Purposes, or ESP, organization. Most of the people we work with are international graduate students, so certainly ITAs, and visiting scholars. The main mission is to analyze genres and communication styles and then use that to provide some short-term language help. So we offer a lot of workshops, independent tutoring, speaking and writing groups, and more recently, language advising. Language advising is a branch of autonomous learning, and it follows in some of the original ideas that came out of post-war France, specifically the University of Nancy. Due to the situation in the post-war era, there were displaced workers who had the skills but not the linguistic knowledge to make use to find employment, and they were because of the situations of the era. Once again, there were not the resources either on the side of academia or with the people for normal language classes, and so they were looking for ways to help more autonomous language learning. Language advising, or advising in language learning, I'll use both interchangeably, is an approach to language education which focuses on one-to-one meetings to help learners become more autonomous. The goals, of course, include language acquisition, but more so the development of learners' ability to create goals and devise strategies and habits to become an effective learner. Focusing on these ideas of creating, organizing, executing, and reflecting. And of course, making the maximal use of minimal contact time with an expert. So what can it offer you as ITA teachers? Well, I hope my ideas will offer you some ideas to help tailor your support to individual needs, following these ideas of differentiated learning, right? Focusing on finding specific actions and goals that are important to your students, and tailoring interactions with them in such a way that you can tie the broader goals of the class into their more specific ones. One example is the idea of noticing. If their goal is to become a better lecturer and they love the way that their advisor works, we can focus them towards the way that their advisor introduces specific points, what phrases are used. And of course, ITAs bring diverse learning habits and ideas of education. And we'll talk a little bit about how we can mix those and adapt them to the expectations of the American teaching environment. So let's start with guiding concepts. There's a number of important ones, but I want to focus on three, but I'll talk about learning and autonomy together. One way to think about learning is to start with the idea of sources of knowledge. On one end of the spectrum, we can think of this kind of idea of discovery learning, the idea that the frames and conceptual structures that we need to understand things are innate, or are built very early in life from early social interactions with family and close relatives, and that all we need to learn is to be given the environment to use those extant frames to then find new things. Kind of on the other end of the spectrum, you have this sort of blank slate transmission model idea, the idea that students are kind of empty vessels and that experts pour in their academic knowledge to fill them up. And both of those have strengths and weaknesses, but the middle ground gives us both. We can understand that students extant frames of understanding and their experiences form a building block from which experts can build up and give them new ideas. The extremes de-emphasize either the individual or the expert, but the middle way appreciates the student's experience while offering a clear place for the expert, right? The prior knowledge and experience is important as it offers a foundation. And then the expert brings efficiency in learning and a focus on the best knowledge available, avoiding problems like trial and error learning or getting focused on old or outdated research. Ideally, the expert brings the best knowledge that's available based on the current research. How do we think about this for ITAs? Well, it's such an interesting experience, interesting situation for ITAs as they sort of rapidly change from this title of novice to this title of expert. And I put those in quotation marks because, of course, their situations are very different. Some come as experienced teachers, and marking them as expert, even if they're teaching a class, is tough, as many of them, it's their first time teaching. Thinking of them as needing to become autonomous quickly is, I think, a helpful way to think of how we send ITAs into the classroom. And one of the things that can help is identifying that view of learning and helping them bring that closer to both your idea of learning as an ITA professional and to the expectations of the environment that they're teaching in. We can also think about how to offer them tools once they go beyond the class, how they can evaluate their teaching, and how they can go on to find new resources and find support. They don't need to be unsupported once the ITA class is over. How can they find that? Now, I want to move on to this idea of being listened to. Listening to someone, listening is in fact a little harder to define than it may at first seem. One psychology article defined it as this multidimensional set of actions, and that it involves attention, comprehension, and relationship. And then relationship can be further broken down into these ideas of acceptance and empathy and non-judgment. Other areas try to define it in sets of concrete behavior. And so, are you paying attention? Are you back channeling? Oh yeah, Are you asking questions? What's your posture and distance? I suggest that it may be best to think about listening more as a concept, something core to which all of these elements are important and which we draw on in individual contexts. Why it matters is there's a great deal of research that's been done on it. Of course, famously, psychologist Carl Rogers created his person-centered approach, and it rested on these ideas like a good listener could help develop a person's personality, and listeners create an environment of safety. So what we can take from this is that being listened to feels good, but also that it promotes reflection, that it offers a space to think together with someone in terms of co-cognition. And as teachers, it offers an opportunity for us to build rapport with our students. We spend a lot of time as teachers solving problems, not just at the end of class, but also in teacher meetings. And sometimes that's the best support that we can offer. Sometimes, though, I suggest that we might resist the urge to immediately solve the problem and instead offer up this listening space. There are some real benefits, as I talked about in the last slide. And sometimes it's the better support we can offer when we have time. Because problems can be rooted in deeper issues, and the listening offers a space for those things to come out. Of course, sometimes it can be motivating just to have someone listen to you, but it also offers an opportunity to build that trust and rapport that can open up deeper interactions later for goal setting, challenging, and then those ideas of self-reflection. So to sum up those two concepts, as I said, I wanted those to be sort of abstracted so that you can draw from what you wanted. The idea of learning and autonomy, ITs will become autonomous learners and teachers quickly. You can start by discussing how people learn and maybe help them think about how they think learning and education works, and draw them towards the expectations. We can also offer habits like goal setting and actions to continue to support them beyond class. As for being listened to, consider it as a new resource or an additional resource for development. And it offering a space to help co-construct solutions to problems with your ITAs. Now, I want to move on to talk about some strategies that might be useful. And again, there's a number of different strategies that we could conceivably talk about, but due to time, I'll focus on just two. The first is this idea of Metaview and linking, and the second is the use of powerful questions. Now, what I mean by Metaview in linking is identifying students' current actions, activities, and struggles, and trying to make those part of broader goals or long-term efforts. In language advising sessions, LAs try to draw on past interactions with students and make use of precise questions to connect students' actions and struggles to those broader goals. How can it help you? I think sometimes it's hard for all of us to see the bigger picture, and that can be especially daunting for international students who are dealing with social and cultural issues, linguistic issues, along with the issues of trying to become a teacher. And I think it allows for the identification of goals and individual needs. And it also offers a chance for us as experts to give them knowledge about grad school life and teaching, which might not be so obvious to them. Also, again, on the idea of motivation, which I touched on earlier, it can be quite motivating to highlight the bigger picture and how smaller actions help. One example from language advising is this one here. So student says, oh, I'm sick of textbooks and word lists. I just hate studying words for no reason. And there's a couple of ways that we can address this. Maybe this is a list of words that they have to take for a language class. Again, not a normal ITA situation. This is more focused on language learners. But the advisor might say something like, well, is there a way to create a reason for learning these words to improve? How can we connect this thing that you have to do about language learning, which you don't like, to something that you know that you want? Or trying to pan back and take a larger view on it. Well, you told me you wanted to become an interpreter. How does your current study relate to your future? How can we look backwards from the future and say, oh, I can see how that fits in? In my experience, there's a couple of different areas in which international students can often make use of these ideas of Metaview and linking. Linking experiences and social contexts is sometimes not so easy. Identifying local language learning affordances, setting micro goals and learning strategies, and then relating current actions to personal goals. Now, I've given an example of each of these, but for time, I'm only going to talk about one of them. Thanks to this being a video, of course, you can click pause and read them to your heart's content. But let's take a look at this micro goals and strategies. For a student that hates the idea of spending time studying and using clarifying strategies, feeling that that it shows that they're failing at interactions, you might say, you know, making a goal to use clarifying strategies and not being afraid to use them seems small, but it isn't. Using the right language to get the information you need is in fact vital. You'll use it from everything from academic conferences to getting directions. So we can link something small that might seem insignificant or even bad to waste time on to something broader, to something that helps them beyond language learning and even into their professional lives. I also thought I might offer some activities by which to engage this idea of Metaview and linking. You could have students create a sort of word web tasks in which they cluster assignments, activities, or problems in the center. And then on the outside goal of the paper or form, set sort of goals and aspirations and ask them to connect those things and see how they connect them up. Alternatively, one strategy that's been suggested is having students write from the position of their future selves. And then looking back and noting how they achieved and maybe even how they overcame certain obstacles to get where they are from that future perspective. Now, I want to move on to my final strategy, which is looking at powerful questions. Questions, again, are something that seems relatively straightforward, but once we try to define them and categorize them, it can become a little bit more difficult. One way to categorize questions is into this simple, complex, and powerful idea. These are ordered in the amount of information that the respondent needs to give to answer the question, how much they need to offer. And so simple would be something like yes or no, one word or short phrase. Yeah, Monday, I had soup for lunch. Complex asks for a little bit more and entails a little bit of contextualization or a little bit of expansion in the response. Why didn't I make it to class on time today? Oh, well, my car broke down and I had to call the tow truck and then I had to take a taxi. Powerful questions rest on the far end of this spectrum, and they require the most explanation, the most context, and in many cases, deep reflection to fully answer. There are some real benefits that can come from this. As I said, it promotes introspection, forcing students to really think about difficult problems. And it can create an environment where they're compelled to put sort of abstract thoughts to force them into the form of words and to force these open thoughts into something that can be talked about, discussed, and considered. There are, of course, difficulties. Powerful questions are not something to be used in every situation. It can be uncomfortable. Asking students questions that they really have to think deeply about takes time and effort. And it often starts with silence. Some powerful questions require the type of introspection that can't be answered immediately. And so this can be uncomfortable for both parties. To give one brief example, again, this is adapted from another source. I'm not going to read all this for time, but briefly to say that the student offers a language learning plan to the advisor, but doesn't seem fully happy with it. And the advisor picks up on this and tries to help by digging a little bit deeper. Well, that plan sounds realistic to me. What do you think's the problem? And that creates a moment of silence when the student thinks. They say, well, I don't know. When I study at home, I just really don't do anything. And so we're starting to see what the real problem is. Oh, you don't start working? Here the advisor restates, without adding anything, restates what the student said. And then they say, well, actually, I spend time just checking messages on my cell phone when I should be studying. And the advisor says, here, is this a time management issue or is it something else, trying to promote that reflection? In this case, the student says, oh, maybe it's I don't study well at home. This is a nice, clean example. Using powerful questions probably isn't always this clean, but it promotes this type of introspection, asking the student to think deeply about what they've just said. And this can offer some benefits. Some common situations that might be useful for powerful questions are when students state their problem as two or more blended issues. If you see that they're stating multiple things, it might be a good opportunity to use powerful questions to help them untangle the two issues, like in the example above. Also, if a student talks about a problem and it seems unconnected to the reason for the problem, that might also be an opportunity to begin to untangle the complex set of things that are going on with the student. And then if you're wondering how to get some of these more powerful questions, some useful phrases might be things that open up conversation, that require less speaking on our side and force or coerce more speaking from our students. So, oh, tell me more about that. Or why is that exactly? Can you explain that a bit, or can you expand on that? So to conclude, I talked about some different concepts and strategies that might be useful to you as ITA teachers that come from language advising. And I hope they're helpful with you I hope they're helpful to you in your interactions with your ITA students. I hope they can give you some tools to better connect with them for individual interactions. Just to briefly review this idea of autonomy and learning, so finding out how your students see learning and how to work from there to bring them into views of learning that are expected of them, but also how to build connections and help make them more autonomous as teachers once they go beyond your class. Also, this idea of being listened to, which hopefully maybe they can pass on as they become teachers, as being a good listener can be quite motivating. Resisting that urge to solve problems and immediately solve a problem from a student and give them a space to talk might open up new avenues. I also talked about some strategies. This idea of Metaview and linking, it can show students how their struggles connect to a bigger picture, or how seemingly small or insignificant tasks can be more meaningful once looked at from a future perspective or from a broader perspective. And then finally, this idea of powerful questions, how to help students unpack complex issues, and giving them a social space to contemplate. Now, if you're thinking, these are all cool ideas, but how do I enact them? That's a tough question. It's not easy. All of our situations are different and all of your contexts will be different. But I wanted to offer something. So perhaps you can add this, or you can work this in with student meetings that you already have. Kind of to replicate what language advisors do in minor is simply meeting students and talking about these issues. And so my suggestion is something like meeting students just for 15 minutes at the beginning of the semester and discussing things like their views of education, their goals for learning, what they believe their issues or problems are, and creating unique goals that work with the objectives of the class, but incorporate their kind of own direction, and write it down if you can. Then you can kind of check in later in the semester, whether it be the middle or the end of the semester. Some of you might already have a reflective writing as part of your assignments that you offer for your classes. This could be part of that, or if it's not something that you already offer, is maybe another reason to offer reflective writing as an assignment. If you don't already do these types of things, my guess is that many of you do. Some ideas on things to focus on during a meeting is helping them elaborate their views of education. Some students have really never thought about how they think about learning or education. And so you can kind of help them discover that, help them bring that out. You can also help them identify some goals and maybe local opportunities to practice and learn. You can identify sites of learning and set small action plans. And then together you can write a short summary of goals and plans. Of course, if you already do this, maybe you can add some of these ideas, or maybe you can just keep doing what you're doing and make some of the concepts I offered a part of it. As a final note, I'm a little bit new to the ITA community for TESOL, and I have to say I was really impressed by how supportive everyone seems of each other and how supportive teachers seem of their students. Lots of stories of hard work after hours to support students. So I hope my short talk offered you some tools to help engage your students one-on-one in interactions and maybe create some more tailored support for them and use that great energy you have. So thank you for attending, and I hope to see you on March 4th if you have any questions or want to talk to me. Thank you very much.